4,500 years ago, long before China had an emperor, the Great Wall, or even a unified kingdom, a massive city rose in what is now northern China. Above ground, it had walls, gates, ditches, and layer after layer of defense. But that was not enough. Beneath all of it, its builders carved out a hidden network of underground passages, a system that could save the people inside the walls or destroy them. Over the next few minutes, we're going to reconstruct how this fortress worked, what archaeologists have found beneath it, and why these tunnels reveal something far bigger than a clever military trick. They reveal a society more organized and more afraid than we'd expect from this period of history. The site is called Houchengzui. It sits in today's Inner Mongolia, on the banks of the Hun River. The settlement dates back roughly 4,200 to 4,500 years, the late Neolithic period. That matters. This was long before the Qin dynasty, the Han dynasty, or any imperial capital. You might picture a farming village, a cluster of homes, some storage pits, maybe a simple wall. Instead, archaeologists uncovered a planned settlement covering about 1.38 million square meters, roughly 340 acres. This was a real city, with residential areas, burial zones, and a defense system built on a citywide scale. So why did a community this early need defenses this elaborate? Imagine approaching Houchengzui as an attacker. You don't just hit one wall and walk through. You face layer after layer, outer ditches, defensive platforms, watchtower-like projections aimed at anyone approaching, and gates built to force people through narrow, controlled paths. Archaeologists have identified two nested barbican enclosures wrapped around the main gate defensive rings within rings. It was a funnel. The deeper an attacker moved in, the less freedom they had compressed into smaller spaces, exposed from multiple sides, with another line of defense always waiting behind the first. For a city built more than 4,000 years ago, this was remarkably deliberate engineering, and all of that was just above ground. Buried beneath the outer defensive rings, archaeologists found something stranger: underground passages, cutting through the earth at depths of several feet, some with arched ceilings, running in different directions rather than toward one central point. At least one appears to connect the inner and outer barbican areas, linking two separate rings of defense underground. That detail changes everything. This wasn't one emergency hole dug in a panic. It was a system built into the design from the start. And once you see it that way, the mystery gets harder, not easier. A city with this many walls already had serious protection. So why dig even deeper? The most obvious answer is war. These tunnels may have let defenders move without being seen, carrying supplies, reaching key positions, or slipping between sections of the fortifications during a siege. But there's a catch archaeologists keep coming back to. A hidden passage only protects a city while it stays hidden. The moment an enemy finds the entrance, the advantage flips. A route built to move defenders out becomes a route for attackers to move in. A supply line becomes a weakness. That risk means these tunnels weren't dug casually. Their placement had to be planned as carefully as the walls above them. There's also a quieter possibility. These passages may have simply been part of daily life inside the city routes for moving people or materials between defensive zones during ordinary times, and only becoming a military asset when a crisis hit. The same tunnel, two completely different jobs, depending on what was happening above ground. But the real surprise at Houchengzui isn't that people 4,500 years ago knew how to dig tunnels. It's the coordination this city required. Walls, gates, ditches, platforms, and underground passages all had to work together. Builders needed to know exactly where the walls would stand before they dug beneath them. Crews had to remove enormous amounts of soil, brace the ceilings, and keep the whole thing from collapsing while keeping it connected to a defensive plan happening on the surface at the same time. That takes more than one household's effort. It takes a citywide decision, someone with the authority to decide where the city would grow, what got protected, and how much labor the community would pour into defense before a threat ever arrived. The rest of the site backs this up. Archaeologists found residential areas, burial grounds, and buildings that stood apart from ordinary homes. Jade objects were placed within the stone walls themselves, a detail that suggests the defenses carried symbolic weight, not just practical value. This wasn't only a fortress. It was a living city, connected culturally to other major sites of the same era, including the massive stone city of Shimao far to the south. Ideas, materials, and building techniques were moving across long distances, which tells us Houchengzui wasn't isolated. But contact isn't the same as peace. So who were they afraid of? That's the question the tunnels can't answer. No evidence gives us the name or face of an enemy. We don't know if Houchengzui ever survived an actual siege or whether these passages were ever used in one. What we have is a city that prepared as if the danger were real, layered walls, controlled gates, and a hidden world running underneath all of it. Archaeology rarely hands us a complete story. It hands us pieces. At Houchengzui, those pieces show a community that understood space, risk, and defense well enough to build the ground above and the ground below as one connected system. 4,500 years later, much of that system is still buried. And the next discovery here may not just tell us what the tunnels were for. It may tell us exactly what kind of world made people build them in the first place.